Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. Today's video is just going to be a shorter one, and I just thought I'd get down and be hip with the kids and talk a little bit about slang and lots of different types of slang, or a particular type of slang, that of the skibidi Rizz Ohio kids out there, Gen Alpha. But I'm not just going to talk about Gen Alpha, I'm going to actually talk about a bit of Gen Z slang, and I'm going to talk a bit about millennial slang, no cap. So yeah, we're going to do a little deep dive into it. We're going to figure out what exactly we mean when we use these words. Actually, we're going to pop a little bit of theory into it, a little bit of intelligence, as come to expect from our little deep dives, and why maybe slang is important and why it kind of bubbles up in different generations with different meanings. But actually, it could also be that we're just using exactly the same meanings of words. We're just using different words to make those meanings clear. Obviously, that was not very well explained, but stay with us and we'll get to the bottom of it. So let's just clarify the three generations that we are talking about here. So the first generation are Gen Y, commonly known as the Millennials. And they obviously were born roughly around 1980s or beginning of the 1980s up until 1996. So they cover that kind of 15-year period. The second generation that we're going to talk about are Gen Z. Again, so these were people who were born sort of 97 up until sort of 2011, maybe 2012. And then we've got Gen Alpha, our youngest generation. And although most of them are only 10, 11 years old at most, they have already got a very exciting grasp of youth speak and are not afraid to use it. So if you've listened to one of them talk about Ohio, skibidi Rizz, I8, and you haven't got a clue what they're talking about, don't worry, this is a video for you. We're going to break it all down and we're going to go over how actually these words kind of have similar meanings to words that maybe you were familiar with. So if you're a millennial, you're Gen Z or Gen Alpha, hopefully we can all realize that we're speaking exactly the same language and it's not as complicated as maybe we think that it is. So let's start with some Gen Y/millennial slang and figure out what exactly they were saying and why they were saying it. So, have you ever had an epic fail? Have you ever thrown shade? YOLO. Well, you must be a millennial then to use these kind of phrases, because these are the phrases the youth speak of millennials used to use. So maybe Netflixing and chill. Did you know that's millennial language, even though I do think it's permeated down to a few other groups within the generations. Bay, squad goals, on fleek. Yeah, you're with me. These are the things that you kind of maybe are using because you still think they're still like the hip linguistic terms, but actually they're not the hip lingo. We are showing our age if we are using these terms. So again, if you ever called anybody basic, I certainly remember Kate Moss being accused of calling somebody a basic on a flight and it making the press back in the day. So again, these are words that maybe we don't use that much, or certainly categorizes as being over the age of 30 because we're using those words. Other words, adulting. Oh God, I use this all the time. I don't feel like adulting today. You know, adulting is hard. You know, again, it's become almost a cliche, a trope, a stereotype of millennials, and we use it all the time. So yeah, really showing my age by using some of these words. Humble brag. Oh my God, I actually used this in one of my shorts the other day, or actually in one of my videos, hashtag humble brag. I'm always talking about hashtags as well. I think that is another millennial phrase. So yeah, that there are quite a lot of these common phrases that will definitely categorize you as a millennial, maybe a younger millennial, but actually I'm more on the elder side and I do definitely still use a lot of these terms. Maybe not so much being on fleek, although I like to think that I am on fleek today. But yeah, definitely the epic fail. I use that one all the time. I'm often doing them. That's why I'm like, hashtag fail, hashtag epic fail. So yeah, so those are kind of common ones that you might be familiar with if you're a millennial, or you might know someone who's a bit older that tends to use them. So let's move on then. Let's go into what are the words that Gen Z were using. So you ever ghosted anybody? You ever called a millennial Cheugy? Have you ever, told someone they're bussing? Have you commented on their drip? If you have, you're most likely a Gen Z and you use these words. You might even call someone cringe, although I also use this, so maybe I'm just super cool and I'm just transcending all the generations here. Have you ever called somebody extra? Oh, that's so extra. If you ever told anybody that they've had a glow up, is anything ever a bit bougie? So these are words that are quite familiar to Gen Z. Again, there is some kind of blending because, as we've said about the generations, they're not always completely strict, are they? There is that kind of overlap. And we've talked about Zillennials that are going to be those Gen Zs that are a bit millennial, and we've talked about those Zalfies that are going to be Gen Zs that are also a bit alpha-y. So we are going to see that some of these words kind of come out. Cap apparently is a Gen Z word, but I definitely know that Gen Alphas are all over that one. So again, they've appropriated it themselves. Maybe you think that something was lit. Let's get lit. That is another Gen Z special there. And bet and standing. Oh my God, maybe you stand that relationship hard. Again, that's come out of that kind of tech speak, isn't it? When we were shipping people and standing things left, right, and center. And technology does actually have a lot to do with this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the theories relating to these words and this language a little bit later on. So if these are words that you feel a bit more comfortable with, or these are words that you actually know what I'm saying and what they mean, then this most likely or predominantly means that you are indeed a Gen Z, and that you'll be familiar with them, and that hopefully I'm making absolute and perfect sense. So we're going to move on to Gen Alpha, the little teeny tiny generation who've already made a very big impression, and boy, are they little precocious minxes. So let's go into some of the vocab and some of the words that they're using. So is this video giving Ohio energy? Skibidi, Rizz. Yeah, is it slaying? Slay. Bruh. Does anyone refer to you as bruh? Has anyone just answered you going bruh? Well, one of my favourite hobbies right now to terrorise my two children and actually those little Gen Alphas that I'm teaching is to try and use Gen Alpha speak in a really quirky and kind of cringe way. Because it's amazing, isn't it? They are literally maybe at the most 13 years of age, and they've already made such a massive impact on the linguistic landscape with their vocabulary. And quite frankly, it's a little bit impressive, isn't it? I mean, where is Gen Alpha language going to go from here? I mean, this is in the early adoption of slang. I mean, what are they going to be sounding like in 10 years' time when they're sort of getting into their late teens and early 20s? Will there be different slang? Will it evolve? Will we have to categorize it into smaller sections like early alphas or Zalfies down to the later alphies, betas, whatever? So yeah, it's going to be quite interesting to see where this slang goes. And honestly, half of their vocabulary is definitely derivative of gaming and meme culture and being on tablets far too young and far too soon. So we talk about like text language evolution and changing the way that we speak. Well, actually, that's clearly evident when we look at Gen Alpha. They've definitely been adopting this. No cap. So, as we know, youth speak is important, and it helps to kind of define the attitudes and ideas that a generation has. It also helps them to communicate with each other and create their own sense of identity, because this all links in to identity. Language is a key way of identifying ourselves, believe it or not, and we create the jargon and the vocabulary to communicate with people who are similar to us, and we also use it as a way of communicating and sharing ideas. So no wonder this youth speak or slang or colloquialisms have a massive impact on a certain generation, because they are kind of trying to establish themselves and create their own kind of cultural identity that reflects the context that they live in. So there's a couple of theories that go along with this. So the first one is Michael Halliday's functional theory, or functions of language, and this is from 1975. So I'll just give you a brief overview of this. So one reason is Halliday calls this social interactional function. So that's what I've just said, that in our social environments, how we interact with each other creates the words that we use, and we need to have language that functions in a particular way. So it helps us to bond, it helps us to create identity, show that we belong, what group that we are part of. So these little Zalfies and Alphas are using, skibidi, Rizz, Sigma, because they're exerting their own identity. They are differentiating themselves from the groups that have gone before them, and therefore these words are really important to them, just as they were the same for Gen Z, Millennials, and I'm sure Gen X and Boomers also had their own language, but we're just not going to go into that because it's a bit too old for me. But feel free to comment if you've got any language that you remember from your youth, you Gen Xers or Boomers. Then there's dialect and identity. So Cheugy and Labov are two theorists who looked into this. So they argue that slang again reflects identity. It's all about defining our identity, and it shows who you are. Gen Z are flexing because they want to show what they're capable of, and it reasserts their identity. It marks them out from boring adults. So, skibidi is that word that means nonsense, and we're sitting there judging them for it. But actually, it's because they want to classify themselves as different from those previous generations that have come before them. Now, context and technology has a lot to do with it. So here we're looking at David Crystal in the 2000s who looked into this, because context shapes us. Context is important. The situations that we find ourselves in mean that we're going to use language in a particular way. So, things like TikTok are spreading a lot of this language. And that's why I feel like Gen Alpha have kind of adopted it much sooner, because they've been exposed to things like TikTok and the internet far sooner than Gen Z and Millennials. And that's why some of this has kind of speeded up, and this adoption of language has happened quite quickly. And as I've said earlier in the video, it'll be interesting to see what Gen Alpha language is going to look like in about 5 years' time, because I think it's going to really move on from this. I don't think those sort of Gen Alphas who are kind of 5 or 6 now are going to be skibidi rizzing quite the same as the older Gen Alphas are. But again, that's going to be interesting, and that's for us to look and observe. And it's a reflection of society, isn't it? Language does reflect the time period. Like, no one's no longer saying groovy baby, which they might have been saying in the 1960s, or super wizard, which they might have been saying in the 1950s. And if you flipped through an Enid Blyton book, you will probably be familiar with some of the lingo and would think, what on earth is this and what does it mean? But language just changed, doesn't it? And that's the beauty of language. It's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and it adapts to the purpose of the environment that it's being used in. So I definitely think that this is something we should embrace and celebrate, even though half the time we haven't got a clue what the younger generation or older generation might be talking about. But actually, do some of these words mean the same thing, but actually the word itself is just different? So this is the final part of the video. We're just going to have a look into this and see how language evolves and how these words might actually mean the same thing. It's just changed to suit the generation that are using them. So if I said YOLO, bet, no cap, am I actually saying the same thing? So YOLO is an acronym and a millennial choice of words, and this stands for you only live once. So, YOLO, let's get on with it. Let's vibe with this. Let's get the energy. Whereas Gen Z's bet would be a confident agreement. Like, yeah, okay, let's do this. Bet, which I kind of think has a similar vibes and similar energy. Whereas the Gen Alpha's no cap means I'm serious, I'm up for it. So actually, semantically, are the words meaning similar? Potentially, yes. So on fleek, slay, it's giving. So when somebody is on fleek, a millennial's commenting on their style, oh, you look perfect, you look good. Whereas when somebody is saying it's giving, that is just like a vibe, that outfit is. And slay, you're actually killing it. So again, these words mean similar, but actually it's a different word itself. So basic, main character energy, and sigma. So again, 3 different generations, 3 different words. So for basic, it's an insult for someone who's unoriginal or too mainstream. But to subvert that, main character means that you're not basic, that you really own your environment and that you are the archetype of your story, the main character, the main protagonist in your story. Whereas for Gen Alpha, to be Sigma is to alert to you being cool and vibing and to have kind of the attention and interest. And it's not about your looks, it's about your whole persona. So it's interesting how these words kind of might have similarities or overlaps, but actually how we choose to define them or the context we use them in aren't actually that different. So squad goals, vibe checks, NPC. So squad goals is this idolizing your groups of friends and being proud of them. Whereas having a vibe check might be assessing what the friendship group is feeling. Like, let's vibe check here, what's going down, what's the tea. An NPC is a non-playable character. So it's kind of saying that people who aren't your friends are just NPCs. They don't mean anything to you. So semantically, the meaning here is kind of the same, even if it's not exactly the same word or the same kind of rigid context. The ideology behind it is quite similar. So really, it's kind of this change and evolving perspective of how we view maybe our friendship groups in this case. Of having squad goals or being, the vibe check or being a non-playable character within your friendship group is something of being a bit like critiqued, isn't it? Oh, don't worry about Carly, she's an NPC, she's not got squad goals. Look at me inverting all the different generational slang here, just vibing, aren't I? Absolutely. Or hopefully I don't sound like a cringy older person who doesn't actually know what she's talking about, because I actually do. I understand this totally makes sense. Totes. Do you remember the word totes? That's a millennial, British millennial. That's totes in a probe. That was definitely something that was banging around about 10 years ago. Oh, the generational slang that I miss and no longer use. Sigh. So maybe you've ever had a fail. Maybe it's cringe. Or maybe it's just Ohio, because actually they're probably the 3 that mean the most similar out of all of the slang that I've looked at in this video. So for millennial, a fail means that you've done something wrong, something's gone terribly badly, and it isn't kind of working out. It's a failure. And that's the same for cringe. Maybe your behavior is a bit cringy, a bit embarrassing, a bit of a failure, and it's kind of a response to that, isn't it? Like, ooh, cringe. And then Ohio is just a placeholder word. And it is kind of defining something awkward or something that doesn't quite fit into the context. It's a bit of a placeholder for cursed or weird vibes. It's a bit Ohio. So again, very similar. It's just that word has been replaced and used differently in the generation that's chosen to comment on something being cringe or being Ohio or being, a fail. And that's what's so fascinating about this. Are we really speaking such different language, or actually there's actually more in common than there is not in common? And listening to my kids speak and seeing some of their chats and some of the things that they say is quite funny, and I can't help but laugh at them or laugh with them, because I think it's really cute and I think it's really adorable that they've got this whole little language system that they're using. And I absolutely love it when old people like myself try and use the same language and make it cringe. That's what it's all about. As I said, my daughter is a Gen Alpha and I'm just cringing all the way through her life at the moment, no matter what I do. So yeah, I'm not going to get that validation from her. But you know what? That's just how it's meant to be. And I'm sure when she's older, she'll appreciate what a cool mum I am. Yes. So how do we summarize millennials, Gen Z and Gen Alphas and why they use the words the way they do? So for millennials, it started with lifestyle, reflecting the world that they were growing up in, and kind of when they started working and early internet humor. Millennials created the meme. Yay, well done, millennials. And so again, that little bit of introduction to technology, that MSN speak, texting, but still having access to more broad media like music videos and television programs that we were commonly watching meant maybe our, references were a little bit broader and less purely internet driven. Gen Z shifted to more emotional states, and their language is more about empowerment and the language of aesthetics and looking a certain way. Again, very much influenced by, the internet and, the Snapchat culture that was emerging. And obviously, they're probably the generation that really embraced TikTok when it arrived in 2019. So again, that was really sort of brought about in their late teens, early 20s. And then Gen Alpha, who are just about hitting their teenagers now at the very oldest. So theirs is based on memes and gaming. Gaming is a big part of this, and TikTok and YouTube driven. So YouTube, we have something to do with this. And again, their humor is probably a little bit more absurdist. I mean, skibidi toilet is a toilet that's a head or something. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's just really weird. But boy, did it land. And now skibidi, I'll be walking around my school and I can hear kids just go, skibidi, Rizz, Ohio, randomly down the corridor, which is just really random. But actually, again, reflects that absurdism, and also maybe reflects their age. As we've said, they are like 13 at most, and, very young, in their language journey. So potentially, I think Gen Alpha language is going to be the language that changes more than maybe Millennial or Gen Z language has done in, the youth speak terms. So it's going to be interesting to watch that. So that's pretty much my little summary. I hope you found this interesting. Feel free to add some terms that I might have missed, or some language speech from your youth that maybe I haven't covered in this video. Maybe it isn't quite as millennial as you would have liked it. Maybe it's not quite as Gen Z as you would have liked it. Maybe it's been very Gen Alpha dominated. Maybe you want to comment on any of the comments that you hear your kids if you're a parent, or maybe some of the language that you hear older people speak that you think is dying out. But yeah, if you've got any thoughts on this, please free to like and comment below. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ta-ta for now. Bye.